Good morning, everyone. It looks like the rendering is continuing, so I'm going to make this a bit shorter, possibly two parts. So the big thing is making sure that you understand the EOC question types, otherwise known as items. For this specific EOC, you're going to have selected responses, which those are like your multiple choice, true, false, things like that. Constructed response means that you're going to have to provide a response of your own. It's short, but just make sure, and we'll look at some examples, make sure that you understand that you need to fully answer the question. So even though it might not explicitly state use textual evidence, it will say use examples from the text. Those are the same things. And we'll talk about that a little bit more, but even in the constructed responses, even though they're shorter, you still need to use some of the language from the text to show that your answers are not just an opinion, that they're factually based. Your extended response or constructed responses are a bit longer than your regular constructed responses. You can get partial credit for these, just like the constructed response, but there's usually a deeper question or multiple pieces of the question that you'll need to answer. And then you also have the extended writing response, and these are your essays. For the EOC for 9th grade, you'll have a narrative, so you'll have to write a story. And then you'll have either an expository or informational text or an argumentative. And that's why you've been working on both this semester. So there's two different rubrics. They're actually included in this packet. I will send this packet out again. I already sent the link to it once, but some of you guys might not have gotten it. So just making sure that you understand the different types of questions and how much effort goes into the response for those. Okay. Okay, so here's an example of a constructed response. And remember that this is a brief response compared to an extended constructed response. So the question is, explain how the author develops the theme of change. Use details from the text to support your answer. Write your answer on the lines below or provided. Okay, so it's addressing the standard about determining theme or central idea, and including how it emerges and is shaped and refined by specific details. It's an objective summary of the text. So in this case, you're already given the theme, so you don't have to search for the theme because that would actually take this a step further. And it's asking you to describe and explain how the author develops that theme. Okay, so in this type of answer, you're going to want to provide how the author develops that theme and then show how the author develops that theme. So some of you might have heard me say before a quote sandwich. So you're going to introduce it. That's like your top piece of bread. Then the quote is the meat. And then the bottom piece of the bread is that explanation of the quote. So kind of use that mindset as you go, that you're going to use, in this case, it would just be an introductory sentence, not a paragraph, because this is a constructed response. You'd introduce the fact that the author develops the theme of change throughout the passage. You would explain what that theme of change is, or what it is in this passage itself, and then explain that development. First they did this, then they did this, then they did this. Okay? Making sure that you're using information from the text. All right, here's the scoring rubric for that, because a constructed response is worth up to 2 points. For a 2, which is what everyone should be trying to achieve, the response gives sufficient evidence of the ability to determine and analyze the development of a theme within a text, includes specific examples or details that make clear reference to the text, and adequately explains the development of the theme within the text and the supporting information with clearly relevant details based on the text. So if you notice, everything is being pulled from the text. So make sure that that's a big part of your response. And then it even gives you a sample response of what would earn a 2. Okay, so again, the author introduces the theme of how things change by describing the mountains, and here's their quotation. The author even describes Van Winkle's home by explaining how it changed. And then they give another quote. Van Winkle is described as having, a quote, inherited, however, but little of marital, sorry. No, it says Marshall. Character of his ancestors. By beginning the story with these descriptions, the author is developing change as a central theme. So notice it's a lot of text, or a lot of heavy use of textual evidence, introducing the topic, providing multiple, again, because it is showing the development of change. One single quotation wouldn't be enough because you can't show how something develops with just one example. So you would show it goes from here to here to here, okay? So do the best. Obviously, you're not going to get this specific prompt, so this is just an example, but just see how much textual evidence is used in what they consider A2. Okay, now here's an example of a writing task. In this case, it's an informational essay. You can see how much information they're giving you. They're telling you it is an informational essay in your own words, explaining some ways diplomats help further the mission of the United States Department of State. You're going to need to use both texts. They're going to give you two different texts in your informational essay. So it's a synthesis, and synthesis just means that you're taking information from multiple sources and combining them for a fuller understanding of the topic, okay? This can be something like talking to two first-person accounts of an event and getting one person's view and the other person's view, and then combining them to understand what really happened. Because we know that truth is based on perspective. So I could see it from the right, the other person could see it from the left. They might see something I didn't, and vice versa. Doesn't mean that if I didn't see it, it didn't happen. But you, as an impartial interviewer, would use both stories to get a full picture of the event. Okay, so that's the same idea with this. You read one text about the same topic of the other text that you read, and then you start to compare what details are in both, what details are specific to one or the other. Okay, and then you're going to answer these questions. So before you begin planning and writing, you will read two texts. As you read the text, think about what details from the text you might use in your informational essay. These are the titles of the texts you will read. Who is a diplomat? What is the mission of the U.S. Department of State? So here is the who is a diplomat. Here is the what is the mission. And then now you have your task. And look at how awesome this is that they give you a bulleted list, and they will, of the different things that you need to do. So again, you give you your response, write an informational essay in your own words. Be sure to use information from both texts in your informational essay. So it says, be sure to introduce the topic clearly, provide a focus, that's your thesis statement, and organize information in a way that makes sense. Please take time to outline. We've talked about this throughout the semester, specifically with your argumentative paper. It really helps to see how each one of the points that you want to include fit in that big picture. If you're going to explain the role of a diplomat, shouldn't that come after the definition of a diplomat? You know, things like that, where you're organizing it so that it makes sense and information connects in a logical way. Use information from both passages. Make sure that you do that, okay? Develop the topic with facts, definitions, details, quotations, or other information and examples related to the topic. Basically, use textual evidence. Make sure that you are using quotations. Make sure that you are using a synthesis mindset where you are saying, this is what this person said about diplomats. This is what this person said about diplomats. So I can understand a diplomat is blank. So that definition is easily seen to be pulled from both passages. Excuse me. Identify the passages by title or number when using details or facts directly from the passages. So if you're going to refer to them as a number in your introduction, go ahead and make sure that you state the names of the articles, and then also say that, you know, you're going to refer to that article as 1. Or refer to that article as 2. And then from then on, you only have to use 1 and 2 to talk about the passages. If you don't do that, you'll have to refer to each one by name, okay? Develop your ideas clearly and use your own words, except when quoting directly from the passages. Just remember, if you are paraphrasing from one specific source, you'll still need to cite that. Okay, if you are synthesizing from both sources, that's fine because that's your own understanding from what you read. That's not something that you'll have to cite. Okay, however, if you are reading just like a paragraph from one and then summarizing that in your own words, that's still paraphrasing because all of those ideas are from that source. Use appropriate and varied transitions to connect ideas and to clarify relationships among ideas and concepts. Those are your transition words between paragraphs and within paragraphs. So if you're saying that there's a process to something, it should be first, then, next, finally, words like that. But then also using transitions to show the connection between ideas between paragraphs. So if you're introducing the definition of a diplomat in body paragraph 1, then you would say that the role of a diplomat also includes blah, blah, blah. So, or something like that, showing that you're not just leaving each one of those paragraphs isolated as not connected with anything else. You're saying, well, this is what a diplomat is. And now here are the roles. Here's the role of a diplomat. Okay. Things like that. Use clear language and vocabulary, establish and maintain a formal style. That also has to do with your word choice. So make sure that you're trying really hard to not use slang, to not use, honestly, contractions are considered informal. I don't know if they'd actually call you on that in this case. So instead of saying don't, say do not. Things like that. If it happens where you use a contraction, I don't think it's that big of a deal, but just keep that in mind in the future, especially since, you'll have to work on your formal and informal writing style through high school. It's also, but with word choice also, instead of, he wasn't, I'm trying to think of an example off the top of my head. He went with it. We know and understand that to be that he accepted it and just followed what the crowd was doing. But saying he went with it also could be interpreted as he physically got up and went somewhere. So instead, try to be really precise with your language and make sure that what you're saying isn't going to be misunderstood. We obviously understand what we're trying to say because it's in our heads. But when someone can't see or talk to us about it, they're going to read it as they interpret it. And that's going to be interpreted as informal and vague. Okay? Make sure you provide a conclusion that supports the information presented. Remember, there's no new information provided in a conclusion. It is simply restating your thesis. And by restating, that doesn't mean word for word, you just copy it down. It means that you revisit it, restate what your main focus was, and you address the main or key points that you made throughout your essay. Remember, informational has objective language, not subjective. So objective is factually based, does not have any opinion markers. So if you say something was hard, that's an opinion because hard is subjective. Something that I find difficult, you might find easy. The only time that you can use subjective language is if you're quoting someone else because they said it, not you. If you say something was confusing, again, that's also part of it. If you say it was a beautiful day, that's also subjective because beauty is in the eye of the beholder, right? So just be really careful. This is part of your correct usage, grammar, spelling, capitalization, punctuation, all that stuff. If you're quoting, remember the period goes after the citation. If it's an exclamation or a question mark, then it goes inside the quotation. If you're paraphrasing the citation, also the end punctuation goes after the end parenthesis. I'm assuming you guys are writing this on the computer, so spelling and things like that might pop up. I'm not sure how they have the program set up. Please don't forget commas. If you need help with commas, please let me know. That goes back to your sentence variety. If you start a question with a dependent clause, which means it's not a complete sentence by itself, you need to have a comma at the end of the dependent clause. So for example, if you use a transition word, furthermore, you have a comma right after that, and then you have your sentence. An example of a dependent clause at the beginning of a sentence would be, though every country has diplomats, comma, the United States defines diplomats as, okay, so that though every country has a diplomat by itself doesn't make sense, right? So if you kind of cut that away from the sentence, you're like, okay, that I know it needs something else. That's why it's called a dependent clause. It depends on something else. So you'd put a comma at the end of that and continue. Another way to use commas is with non-essential clauses. And that's by saying, adding clarity to your comments. Excuse me. So if you say, I'm in the multicultural class within the virtual school, and my teacher, comma, Mrs. V, comma. So Mrs. V isn't required for that sentence to make sense, but you might be in multiple classes. In this case, there aren't multiple multicultural lit teachers, but if there were, then that's a way to further specify or be more specific about who you're talking to. The other main issue that I've seen from a lot of your writings is vague pronouns. If you are talking about multiple things or multiple groups or more than one person that's the same gender, using he in a sentence doesn't tell us which person you're talking about. Using they or we doesn't include who you're talking about. So one way to get around that is by stating one of those groups and then using the pronoun for the other. And that way we know that he is the other guy that you're talking about, or the they is the other group that you're talking about. Okay? But other than that, that's really the main thing to worry about with the writing. Narrative, you guys already know narrative pretty well. Remember, it's a story. It has to have a clear beginning, middle, and end. There's dialogue. This is where it's really descriptive and detailed. You need to include emotional language. That's your subjective stuff. Your arguments also can have subjective language because remember, your purpose for an argumentative is to persuade. Okay? Your purpose for a narrative is to entertain. But you also want to remember that narratives go hand in hand with imagery. You want to create an experience for your reader. You want them to feel like they know these people that you're creating in your story. You want them to feel the same way or understand the emotions of the characters. You want them to be able to see the setting and see what someone looks like or think or imagine what someone sounds like by the types of words that you use to describe it, okay? But the key there is dialogue, making sure that you have people talking, making sure that you break up your story based on some type of organization. Usually in a narrative, that's time or a change in setting, okay? Because usually a change in setting indicates that time has passed, even if it's a small amount. Just make sure that you have a very clear beginning, middle, and end. If you have any questions, and I'm sorry I kind of rushed through this, the other one is still rendering. If it works and I can get that out, I will send that link as well. But I just want to make sure that you understand that the writing part is a heavy piece of this. Okay, one last bit. So you're going to be taking this test in two testing sessions. Section 1 is writing, and it has to be done on a different day. It's required to be done on a different day than sections 2 and 3, okay? So section 1 is writing. You have up to 90 minutes to complete section 1, and then you have 75 minutes per section to finish sections 2 and 3, okay? So sections 2 and 3 are definitely your multiple choice, and things like that. So this year, just like in previous years from 2011 on, this EOC counts as 20% of your grade. It is your final exam for your 9th grade B course. So you will not know what your final grade is until we receive those EOC scores, okay? That may be before the end of the semester. It may not be. It's going to be close in years past as long as you take it on the actual day and not the makeup day. Most of them are delivered by the end of May so that you'll know at some point. You can certainly email me and ask me if I have gotten it back yet. I will most likely send out a message to let you know that they're in once I receive them, unless it comes really, really, really late in the semester, meaning on a teacher work day like you guys are done. Okay, so just keep in mind that you will at least have them separated. So focus on writing first because that's usually the first day that you test. And then if you want to take a moment to look at the rest of this assessment guide, it actually has the rubrics. There's two different rubrics, one for the narrative and one for the argumentative / informational option. And they are looked at differently. They are scored differently. One is a holistic rubric, and that's for the narrative because they're looking at the whole piece as itself, while the other one is looking at the different chunks that you incorporated into your paper. Okay. But anyway, let me know if you have any questions. Please go ahead and sign up for that USA Test Prep. And I hope to hear from you soon.